Visiting a Devonshire farm, we've a crash course in poetry writing next Monday morning with Big Slam at 10:30 here on BBC2.
Thinking Skills tackles the topic of property next Tuesday, the 30th of January at 1:20 here on BBC2.
And Words and Pictures returns with the next episode of Fun with Phonics tomorrow at 10:50 here on BBC2. Razzle Dazzle discovers why the moon is made of cheese next time. That's next Friday at 10:30 on BBC2. Dave watches the penguins performing some balancing tricks on an iceberg in the next episode. More Starship next Friday at 11 on BBC2. The BBC Primary Guide gives full details of television and radio programmes, websites and support material for this term. It's available free to schools by phoning 08700 100 321.
You can find out more about our whole range of programmes with the Spring War Chart. For more information, call 08700 100 321.
And you can have more fun with phonics next week on Thursday and Friday at the same time, 10:50 here on BBC2.
A Maths Challenge returns next Monday morning here on BBC2. And the Making Sense of Health series continues with Rick Mail in 20 minutes, examining teeth and eating.
We'll be meeting some fantastic animals in next week's programme, so more Music Makers next Thursday at 10:50 here on BBC2. Next week we're going to be thinking about me and my family, so more Watch starting at 10:50 next Friday on BBC2. Next week we'll be meeting some children who have arrived in Britain as refugees, so more Focus at 11:20 next Friday on BBC2. For up-to-date times for BBC Education programmes, you can check your local listings or alternatively log on to bbc.co.uk/schools/guide.
Next week, the importance of testing materials to make sure they're right for the job and a look at different types of stone. That's Pod's Mission next Tuesday from 1 on BBC2.
More creative inspiration for your imagination in Big Slam Poetry next Thursday at 11:30.
Schools programmes continue at 1 o'clock with Barnaby Bear taking a trip to Edinburgh and some fun ways to develop language with Something Special.
The story of the Iron Man continues with sign language in just 5 minutes here on BBC2.
It's Operation Rescue when Captain Crimson falls ill next Thursday. That's Look and Read at the same time, 10:30 here on BBC2. Find out how the Romans relaxed tomorrow here on BBC2. More primary history at 11:20 here on BBC2. More country dances explained next Thursday here on BBC2 at the same time, 11:30.
In the next Primary History, Alex finds out about ancient Greek architecture, philosophy and medicine. That's tomorrow morning at 10:30 here on BBC2. This afternoon, BBC Education returns with a double bill of Something Special, the programme that helps to develop language in a fun and exciting way. That's from 1 o'clock here on BBC2.
Seaside Entertainment next Friday. Another trip with Magic Grandad in Watch at 10:50 here on BBC2. Staying in Germany, looking at home life and hobbies next Monday at the same time, 10:30 here on BBC2. The story continues next Tuesday here on BBC2. More English Express at the same time, 11:30. More science clips on Tuesday morning next week, starting at 10:30 here on BBC2.
Danny's Challenge continues next week. More from the Master Storyteller next Thursday at 10:30. And Magic Grandad will be meeting more famous people from history in 3 weeks' time. That's on Thursday the 4th of October at 11:30. The story continues with the first key when Look and Read returns next Friday at 10:30 on BBC2. Next week, a brother and sister who have faced racism tell their story and give some advice on what people should do if they're facing racism. That's next Friday at 10:50 on BBC2.
Get your brain on the move with more thinking skills next Monday afternoon at 1:20.
More programmes from BBC Education tomorrow morning on BBC2, starting at 10:30 with Faith Stories.
More schools programmes to come later today with A Midsummer Night's Dream, a Shakespeare animated tale at 1 o'clock here on BBC2.
More schools programmes next week starting from 10:30 on Monday morning here on BBC2 with Around Scotland.
And there'll be more schools programmes here on BBC2 on Thursday morning from 10:30 with Let's Write a Story.
Magic Grandad is back with More Watch next Thursday. That's the 11th of October at the same time, 11:30. There's more What, When, Where, Why next Friday, the 12th of October at the same time, 11:30.
Discover more about the ancient civilization next Monday when Primary History takes us on a journey through Pakistan and India at the same time, 10:50.
And we've more programmes for schools later on this afternoon here on BBC2 with a story of romance in disguise. As You Like It, Shakespeare the Animated Tales is at 1 o'clock. And there's more spelling with the Spellets next Thursday here on BBC2, same time, 11:10. Who will we meet next week? Find out when Watch returns next Thursday here on BBC2, same time, 11:30.
See You, See Me returns in 3 weeks' time here on BBC2.
Schools programmes are taking a little break from BBC2, so the next Primary History will be in 3 weeks' time.
Next week's programme examines just how we led our daily lives as the war developed. That's at 10 to 11 next Monday here on BBC2.
More tips on how to write a great story next Thursday at 11:30 here on BBC2.
Discover more about Saxons and Vikings in Primary History next Monday, and that's at the same time, 10 to 11 here on BBC2.
Abs is back next week, finding out more about instructional writing. So more Let's Write Non-Fiction at 10:50 next Thursday on BBC2. Next week, a look at how different homes were 450 years ago, at what they looked like and which materials they were made from. That's at 10:50 next Friday on BBC2. Next week, we're going to focus on how writers draw us in by creating a real sense of character. So more English Express at 11:10 next Friday on BBC2.
And next week, Terry meets the woman who changed the face of English history, the enigmatic Anne Boleyn. That's at the same time, 11:50 next Thursday, here on BBC2.
And there's more from Watch in 3 weeks' time.
Jane will be back in Mexico next week, visiting possibly the largest city in the world, Mexico City. Primary Geography returns next Tuesday at 10:50. And we'll be back with more programmes for schools at 1 o'clock today. We'll be back in the chat room at the same time next week discussing self-esteem. That's next Thursday at 10:30. English Express will be back tomorrow with more language knowledge, finding out about the words slowly, sadly and wildly. That's at 11:10 on Friday. And Grant and Steph are going to be cycling in the country next week. They'll be back at 10:30 next Friday. We'll be finding out about children at play next week, at how rich and poor children entertain themselves in Victorian Britain. That's at 10:50 next Friday.
More adventures with Zap and the Word Master next Monday at 10:50 here on BBC2. The Magic Key will be back next Monday at 11:45 here on BBC2.
Imagine a time when there were no cornflakes, no sugar and no potatoes. What did people eat instead? A look at food next Tuesday at 10:50 on BBC2. Next week, Andy will be visiting a Caribbean spice island to investigate tropical weather. That's next Tuesday at 1:10 on BBC2. What's the difference between a triangular prism and a square-based pyramid? We'll join Mathsman for some 3D shapes next Thursday at 10:50 on BBC2. The difficult problem of how you get a mammoth in a bath next week. Another double bill of The Way Things Work, beginning at 10:45 next Friday on BBC2.
And you can see the last episode of Birth, Care and Growth next Monday at the same time, 11:30.
Next week, a new series of Mega Maths all about fractions. That's at the same time, 10:50 Thursday, here on BBC2. World Environmental Change next week. Primary Geography's back at the same time, 11:10 here on BBC2. Toys from the 1950s here on BBC2 next Friday. More adventures with Magic Grandad, same time, 11:30.
BBC Schools programmes will be taking a break for the summer, but they'll be back in September.